Thanks everybody for joining us. My name is Sally Caldwell. I'm the Adult Library Associate here at Trone Memorial Library in East Point. And thanks so much for joining us for this conversation about mental health. Almost all of us know someone who is living with mental health issues. I have people in my own family with diagnoses, and I, as a library staff member, I have talked to many people this year who have shared the challenges that they're going through, especially right now with the isolation that they're experiencing. So I'm delighted that you all could be here. We have with us Wanda Miller, who's community member living with a mental health diagnosis, and Danielle Franz. You prefer to be called Dell?
Yes, please.
Okay, and she's a supervisor with York Adams Mental Health and Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. And we may have Anne Christie Perez joining us as well. So how this will work is everybody already has muted who's joined us, but if you would like to ask a question, I'm going to open up the chat box here and you can type it in there. Or really, we're a small enough group that if you want to unmute and ask a question, would that be okay with you, Wanda and Dell?
That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, that would be great.
It's fine.
Perfect. Okay, I'll let you take it from here.
Do you want me to start, Dell?
Go right ahead.
Okay. All right. And thank you so much, Sally, for hosting this. I think everyone should really give a round of applause to Sally for doing this and being willing to having these ongoing conversations, because they are long overdue. Before I tell people, before we have the pandemic that everyone knows about and listens to on the news every day, we had a pandemic, which is mental illness, substance abuse. Approximately 1 out of every 4 people have some kind of mental health issue. That number is probably much higher. I think it is, because there are a lot of individuals that don't recognize that they have a mental health issue, or they try to put it off, or they don't want to get treatment because it's so stigmatized. And also sometimes there's the barriers to getting resources, and then there are people's pride. And you know, my big takeaway that I want everyone to have from this talk is that it is okay to be, it is okay not to be okay. That is perfectly fine. You know, I look at mental illness as just like I have my diagnosis is I'm a trauma impacted person, and I live with complex PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. I've also been diagnosed with adult ADD, which is attention deficit disorder. And I've struggled with depression my entire life. Before I was diagnosed with the PTSD, I had depression to the point I remember being a child and being so depressed, I would lay in bed at night and pray to God to end my life, because I didn't know how to do that myself. And I guess I should just stop there for a minute and let everybody know that this is Dell and I met through a trauma-informed care training, and we'll talk a little bit more about that then. But I am a community member. I don't work for the county, Dell does, but we started, that's how we met. And one of the things that we want, what both of us want this to be a safe space for everyone. There is no judgment here. Please feel free to ask questions. There are, you know, I'm fine with any kind of question. I'm not offended, not easily anyway. And, you know, also there may be things that come up that trigger individuals. If you feel triggered and you need to walk out of the room, that's perfectly fine. If you need to, I don't know, throw a blanket or something over your device that you're listening this on, so you don't see, if you don't see us or hear us or something, whatever you need to do to stay safe. That's what we want for everyone. We want everyone to be safe and to feel comfortable in this discussion. And also, if there is anything that you want to talk about that you don't feel comfortable talking about, in this format, please feel free to reach out to myself or Dell, and hopefully Ann, because Ann Christy Perez is Director for Mental Health Services, I believe. Is that the correct title, Dell?
That's correct. And she is on. Yeah.
She's on.
Yep, I'm here. I'm here. Yep.
All right. Hi, Ann.
Yep.
Hi.
Hi. Yes, I am the Director of Mental Health Case Management for York and Adams counties.
So the three of us are, we said we went through a trauma-informed care training together, and we'll talk a little bit about what trauma-informed care is later. But we are also serve on a health and wellness committee with the trauma team. It's called, we're doing trauma teams. And basically what we're trying to do here is show some unity between the community and the providers, because also often there's a big disconnect there. People don't feel comfortable talking to providers, or maybe you had a negative, I know I've had plenty of negative experiences with different providers. Some providers just don't get it. And there are truly compassionate providers like Dell and Ann, but then there are other providers that are basically, okay, this is my adult job until I get a better job kind of mentality. You try to weed those people out, but sometimes it doesn't happen. So we'll talk a little bit about that later, but just what I want everyone to know is that this face is the face of mental illness. So it's not the stereotype of you see the person walking around very disheveled, maybe they're a homeless individual and they're talking to themselves, or you hear about school shootings and that mental illness comes up there is, oh, that person must have been crazy. And the thing that I want people to understand is that is media's perception of what mental illness is, because the majority of people with mental illness look like me. They are your friends, your neighbors, your relatives, people that you work with. They don't necessarily look crazy. As I said, I remember being very, very young, being in maybe elementary, well, maybe a little older than elementary school, maybe middle school or so, and just feeling so depressed. I was a very sensitive child, just feeling so depressed that I just did not want to go on. And I've had suicidal ideation, which what suicidal ideation is basically when someone is talking about suicide, it can be active or passive. Active is the person has a plan. The person is intending to go through with that. They are going to attempt. And passive is, it's just a thought, and that's what I have most every day. I have some kind of intrusive thought, and that usually happens when things are really bad or I'm under a lot of stress. It'll just, the thought will come, maybe it'd be better if I wasn't here. It took a lot of therapy. It took a lot of being open and willing to talk about my issues to get to the point where I now control the mental health issues. I control the PTSD. It doesn't control me. And I also want people to understand that it's not all bad, because the trauma changes you, and it does that. There's scientific evidence that it does that. It does that in the brain. But in some of the changes are not so great, but other changes are good. And for myself, a couple of the positive changes is I learned to have more empathy for other people. I wouldn't be sitting here with two ladies from the county if I hadn't learned empathy, because the county has not been kind to me. I've had issues with the county. That's a long, involved story for another day. But that's one thing, one way that it changed. Another positive change for me was just being able to get into someone's headspace differently. Like, I have more empathy for them. I also can I've learned not to be judgmental. I've learned to just try to understand, because everyone has a story. Everyone, that person that cuts you off at the lights and you're angry and it's like, oh, these horrible drivers. That person may have just gotten a call where a family member, because we're in COVID, we have COVID right now. I'm just going to use that as an example. Maybe they had someone in the hospital that they love that has COVID and things have taken a turn for worse. And right now they don't care about traffic lights or anything else. They just want to try to get to their loved one before the end. So there's a way of looking at things differently when you have mental illness. I think another thing that I want people to know too is that, again, it's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something, and I know for a very long time I struggled with that. I am on disability. I couldn't work because of the mental health issues. And it's really hard when you've been told your entire life. I went to college, I graduated with a 3.85 or 84 average. I graduated magna cum laude. I was, everyone, I had what it took to be a very successful person, but here I was disabled. I was homeless for a while. I struggled. I was inpatient, and that does a lot to your self-esteem. It's very, very hard to go from a very functional person, someone who has the future in front of them and it's so bright, and then suddenly just everything eclipses and there's nothing. It was very, very hard. And I remember when I started getting started on my journey back to where I am now, I met people I met people in the mental health community that helped me, and not just providers, but also other members of the mental health community. But then I started branching out. I started going and getting involved in other volunteer organizations and things. So I made friends that were outside the mental health community. And some people understood mental health and mental health issues had impacted them. And other people didn't really understand it. But everyone was really nice. And I just remember being involved with this really, really, really cool group of ladies, and all very, very professional ladies. And they were doing great things. And they would invite me to their meetings and such. And I just remember going to these meetings and thinking to myself, the only reason they're inviting me is because they feel sorry for me, because I'm the poor mentally ill girl, and they feel bad for me. And I felt like that for a very long time, worked with my therapist about it. And there was one moment when I went to, I think it was actually a Christmas party that one of the ladies had, and I was invited and I went. And we were in her home, and by that time I had made some friends. And I remember talking to my one friend, and I just happened to say this to her that, for the longest time I felt like I didn't belong in this group. And she looked at me with this, what? She had no idea, because she just was amazed that I would ever have those thoughts. And what she said to me was, Wanda, we have you here because we value you as a person. We have you here because we like you, because we think you're fun to be around, and you're smart, and you have a lot to give. And none of us even think about you having a mental health issue. That's part of you, but it doesn't define you. Now, of course, she didn't say those words. That wasn't verbatim what she said, but but basically what she was telling me was, it's, that's your perception of how we're perceiving you. They were perceiving me as just one of the girls. But it does do that to you if you let it. And now that's why I want to stress to everyone that, again, it's okay not to be okay. I have a physical issue. I have fibromyalgia. It's kind of like a chronic pain, chronic fatigue condition. And I'm not ashamed of that. So why should I be ashamed of having a mental health issue? And I'm going to just leave it there, and then we can go back if anyone has questions, because I want Dell and Ann to have time to talk about the great services available in the county.
Great. We lost Anne. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I'm
No.
happy to speak in regard to mental health services. So my name is Dell, and I am blessed that I do work in the field of mental health. For the last 7 years, I've been a county employee and worked first as a CASP coordinator, reaching out to individuals who do have some mental, behavioral, emotional, physical health disabilities, and really trying to coordinate appropriate care. Most recently, I became a supervisor with MH-IDD and working specifically in the children's mental health field. I think it's important to just focus on the fact that, mental health right now, in the last year is really at the forefront of things that people are dealing with. We've been isolated, and the news has been terrible. We've had loved ones possibly be affected by COVID. School looks different, work looks different. Maybe you were let go or furloughed. There are so many challenges. So right now, as Wanda said, it is okay to not be okay, because certainly our world has turned topsy-turvy, and we're just not prepared and weren't given enough notice to prepare ourselves for it. So with mental health case management, which is what MH-IDD provides to individuals with mental health, we will help make referrals and connect you to the right resources. We can attend appointments with you, when you see a psychiatrist or a counselor to share information. We can help you get medical assistance so that you can access the highest level of mental health treatment. We can be a listening ear. We can be an advocate. There are so many things. So I want you to know that if you are feeling anxious or depressed, there is help out there. There are people within my agency that I can help to connect you to, and we can walk you through getting some things in place to help you feel well. Self-care is so important, and sometimes a bath or a walk outside just isn't cutting it, and you might need a little more. And again, that's okay. I think right now we all need a little more. We're all struggling personally. So I just want to put that out. But certainly if you have children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, neighbors that have children, there are services for them as well. Wanda had mentioned that we met in a trauma class that we had taken. And, trauma looks different for a lot of people. And COVID has been a traumatic event. So, it will affect the way that your brain works. It impacts your body, so many different things. So we need to take a look at you as a whole, not just a mental health diagnosis, but your whole health. And we want to support you and get you connected to the right community as well as therapeutic services. So with trauma, as I mentioned, your body remembers it. So if you have had a significant traumatic event, not just like this long COVID episode, but a significant event like a car accident or something like that, trauma is stored within your body. It's stored within your muscles and your nerves, and then is then stored in the primitive parts of your brain. And, sometimes if you are heightened by anxiety or frightened by something, your body is then triggered by your past trauma to react in a certain way. So it's okay if that's happening. If you have fight, flight, or freeze occur during something and you're not exactly sure why that happened. Why are you frightened? Why are you running? And it could be that you've experienced trauma in your life and it's surfacing now because there's so many other stressful events happening in your life or in your world. So I think that's just important for everyone to know. We don't often sit down and really think like, what's happened to me? Could I be responding because of something from my past or something, you know, even when I was 2 years old that I don't even really recall? So I think it's really good to self-reflect, but it is also great to reach out for help and support. And that's where our agency comes in and can really be that for you. So I can talk for hours and talk about services and things, but I really feel like if there are questions, I want to answer them because I want to make sure that those that are participating feel like they're getting something personal out of this, not just us talking in general terms, that really we are there to help you and to listen and see what we can do. Okay. So I don't know if anyone has any questions. Feel free to write them in the chat box or just, unmute yourself and ask. I do know about adult services, so I can certainly answer some questions about adult services as well. Community.
I have a question.
Things. Yeah.
So my question is, do you have to have a doctor's diagnosis in order to get services? Or can somebody start just by calling your number?
Yes. So for our services, you do not need a diagnosis. If you feel like you need assistance, you reach out to us and you're assigned a case manager. And that case manager can help you to get to a psychiatrist to get a psychiatric evaluation to determine if you truly do have a mental health diagnosis. If you do, that evaluation will also recommend treatment options, possibly medications, services such as therapy, and different types of therapy. And then we can assist with making referrals to the appropriate sources, because the mental health world is very complicated. They have long wait lists, but at the county, we kind of partner and are able to know who has openings the fastest. So then we're able to assist with that. Also, if specifically for children, if your child has a diagnosis, you can then apply for medical assistance. Even though you may have private insurance, you can apply for medical assistance because in our state, any child with a mental health or physical health disability qualifies for medical assistance. And then medical assistance offers higher levels of services, such as in-home services for children that private insurances just don't cover.
It's interesting because when my daughter, when we realized she was struggling with depression, she was in high school, and we just went through the doctor's office, and I had no idea that there was anything else available. We got her a counselor, and she ended up getting on medication, and that was my only experience with it. I had no idea there was another route at all.
Sure. And I think you're right, Sally. I think initially, if you think something's wrong, you go to your physical health doctor. And if it's something mild, your physical health doctor may prescribe a medication or make recommendations. But truly, if you have something more significant, we always recommend that you see a psychiatrist, because your PCP can cover a lot of basic things, but doesn't specialize in one thing. The psychiatrist specializes in mental health and then is able to maybe prescribe better options of medication and monitor that more closely. But that's not necessarily the case for every person. In general, though, if we can get you in with a psychiatrist, we like to do that. So, you know, and I kind of say, like, if you had, you know, if you had cancer, you would go to an oncologist, not necessarily your PCP for treatment, because, okay, your PCP can help generally, but is not a specialist. And that's why, again, a psychiatrist specializes in all of those things. So, and I think it's important to also say that, you know, mental health, it needs to be treated, just like if you had diabetes or high blood pressure or something like that. If you are feeling like you have some type of mental health disorder, then we want to get you help. You don't want to suffer. You know, if you were having heart issues, you wouldn't just sit at home and not seek treatment, you know, because if you're in pain and struggling. So, and that goes for mental health. And sometimes we just mentally get in our heads and we just feel like we don't deserve treatment or can't access it. And that's not true. So.
And I think it's also important, Del, to add that as a, I call myself a client. The other term is consumer, but I call myself a client. The client always has choice too. So if you go to a therapist and you just don't feel comfortable with that therapist, you have a right to ask for another therapist.
Yes.
You, in the same way with a case manager, or if there's someone, because sometimes it has nothing to do, the case manager could be a very sweet person, but that person may remind you of someone that you had a negative experience with or trigger you somehow. There's, you know, there are personality conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
So just keep that in mind, that you always have choice here. That's when you go to MH-IDD, they're not going to dictate what you should and shouldn't do. No. You do have choice. They're there to work with you, not to tell you what to do.
Certainly. And that's exactly it. You always have a voice and choice in this. And yet we always like to tell our consumers that if you start going to counseling and maybe after 4 or 5 sessions, you're just not feeling that connection and you are not comfortable and don't want to open up, well, then let us know, because we can try to get you a different counselor, because, you know, you need to benefit from the counseling. You don't need that to be just, you know, something else that you're going to struggle with. So absolutely, you know, we want to help and so forth. And I do see a question, so.
Yeah, we do have a question. Who or what determines if someone is unconsciously recalling a past traumatic event or just currently dealing with an immediate crisis?
Wow, that's a tough question.
I couldn't hear that, Del. What did she say?
Who or what determines if someone is unconsciously recalling a past traumatic event or just currently dealing with an immediate crisis? Mm-hmm. And I think that's difficult, because if you don't know that you had a past traumatic event, you're not going to be able to know whether it is just something current or if a current event triggered something from the past. Mm-hmm. And I would say that certainly, you know, therapy would be a great option, because you do want to dive deeper and see if you can recall anything. And again, that a lot of that trauma is kept in this primitive part of your brain, not even in, you know, a part where you can recall it sometimes. So it can be very difficult.
Yes.
And I can piggyback off of that a little bit, Del. I actually had a similar experience to this question. I had experience where something was really bothering me, and I had to me, it was overreaction to something that happened. And I see a therapist every week, and she's trauma trained. She deals with children and adults that have had trauma. So she's very good. She's gone through the trainings and such. And what she did is she helped me process it. I mean, she took me back and she said, do you remember, you know, this particular incident like XYZ? And I couldn't remember any kind of incident. So, but she gave me some things to think about. And About 2 days later, I remembered something and I took it back to her, and we're like, well, that could have been it. So Dell's absolutely right. You know, trauma gets locked away because you have to understand that trauma, your body is set to protect you at all costs. And this is why it's so difficult for people who attempt suicide to complete suicide. You know, and again, I don't want to trigger anyone here, but you know, there have been cases with individuals who have attempted suicide in very horrific ways where they have shot themselves or whatever. And you know, I've talked to EMTs who have come on the scene, and the person is literally trying to hold themselves together from that gunshot because they don't want to die. It's not about wanting to die, it's about wanting the pain to stop. And that's why these kind of discussions are so important, because we need to get to that point where we can talk. I mean, I have a therapist that I can talk about these things to her. I can talk about anything to her because I trust her, because I know she's not going to, you know, oh my gosh, you know, I'm gonna 302 you. I mean, you know, put you in some lockdown somewhere and you're never going to see the light of day because you had some kind of weird thought. That's generally, if you have a good therapist, that's not going to happen, because a good therapist will be able to discern between someone who is having an active suicidal thought or a passive suicidal thought. They'll be able to discern whether or not someone could do harm to themselves or others, or they're just very frustrated and they're just at their wits' end. So that's what I would suggest. If you have a therapist, try to process that out with him or her.
And if you don't, that's what, like Dell was explaining at MH-IDD, that's what we do. We connect you with therapists who we have in our network who are, there are some that we know who are, trauma informed and work well with those individuals. There are some that we notice, that might not be a good fit. So we would connect you with that. That is what we do.
Absolutely.
I was going to ask you, so you can connect people with providers. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, now I can hear you better. Yeah.
What about support groups? Do you have support groups that are associated with your organization?
We deal with NAMI, and NAMI has a number of support groups. So we typically refer folks there. A lot of times Dell and I will know things in the children's system. Sometimes WellSpan has support groups for parents of anorexics. Sometimes, there are different types of support groups in different areas that we might be able to connect you with that we know of. There's a huge autism support group network out there. There's a huge reactive attachment disorder support group network out there that we are familiar with because we know the parents and we work with them. And I know Wanda probably has some people that she knows as well. So we kind of have our own little network that we could connect people to.
Yeah, I would recommend, and just two things, because I think there's two things that need to be explained at this point, because I don't think everyone may be familiar. NAMI is National Alliance on Mental Illness.
Yep.
It is, I volunteered with them. I'm not currently volunteering with them, but I have volunteered with them. They do great things. They are a grassroots organization started by a group of individuals who had loved ones with mental illness, and they didn't have a great York Adams MH-IDD like we have. So they were struggling trying to find help, and that's how NAMI came to be. So NAMI is, and I'll try to look that up here. I have my Chromebook beside me. I'll try to find that number. I don't have it in my head. And the other thing that I just want to mention is we're talking about trauma-informed care. And I think just to give people an idea of what trauma-informed care is, I have a really good little example that someone told me years ago, and it stuck with me because it's excellent. So trauma-informed care is basically, think about the child that's late for school every day. Traditional thinking is that child is bad, irresponsible, needs discipline, put the child in detention, maybe, kick them out of school for a while, suspend them, whatever. Now, rewind that whole thing and watch that child come through the doors every day. And the child's being met by a bully. And the child has learned that, okay, if I wait to 5 minutes after the bell, I can pass safely. The bully won't beat me up. That changed your perspective on that child. Now that child isn't irresponsible. That child's scared. That child's being victimized. So that's basically when we talk about trauma-informed care, we're looking at not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. So as Dell said, we're looking at a holistic picture. We're looking at, okay, what happened in your past that is causing maybe negative behaviors now? And how do we get to that? And how do we change that? So I just wanted to add those two just to clarify, because I know when people first talked to me about NAMI, I was like, what the heck's that?
Yeah.
I
looked it up while we were chatting here,
Okay.
and I have a phone number, 717-848-3784. And if you Google that, NAMI of York and Adams Counties, NAMI, York and Adams Counties, everything will come up there. But that is the phone number.
And Danielle Dennis is the contact over there. She's the one that, she's the program, I don't know her exact title, but she does the programming for NAMI.
What kind of programs do they offer? What do they offer that's different?
Did she just, Sally, you just said, what do they offer?
Yeah, what do they offer that's different?
Okay. Again, like Wanda had said, NAMI is comprised of volunteers mostly. They have, of course, newsletters and event info that you can access on there. Become a member. And then they have their phone numbers of how to contact them. But what they do is, and they also have a section that says what's happening. They really support families. It's more support groups than case management. They don't, they're not going to, they would refer you to us to connect you with psychiatry, therapy, and things like that. They're basically a support group and a handful of folks who will guide parents through. For example, if you have a child with autism and you go to them and say you need some assistance, they'll connect you with some of the groups, and they will also probably refer you to us for case management, because there's certain kinds of funding that a child with autism might be able to get, for example. So basically support group type is what they are.
They also offer programs like In Your Own Voice, which I volunteered with, and two individuals who were living with a diagnosis will go into a hospital or a substance abuse treatment center or a school, wherever, and we'll talk about our personal experiences, kind of like what we're doing here, or what I'm doing here tonight. The other thing that we did is I was also trained for was peer-to-peer, which periodically they would have a group of, I think it was 8 would be the limit. And then you have 2 peers that lead this discussion every week for 8 weeks or whatever. And we would talk about everything from, okay, how do you advocate for yourself? How do you make a crisis plan? How do you look at medication, and how do you keep yourself on track with medication? What do you do to make yourself feel better when you're not feeling so good? Those types of things. So they have support groups, but they also have programs as well.
And that and trainings and things.
Right.
Peer-to-peer is fabulous. That really is a fabulous piece.
So it seems like there's a lot of different, I don't know what's going wrong with my mic here. Sorry about that. I was just going to ask you about What do you see most commonly? I mean, mental illness, it seems like a huge umbrella here.
I think right now, because of COVID, as I mentioned, I think the biggest thing that we're seeing is just anxiety and depression. People are anxious about the world in general, leaving their home and feeling safe. Maybe if your job duties and being able to perform them properly from home or something. And then depression because they're isolated, especially people that are extroverts and really thrive on, having people around. Just, a level of depression of being isolated. And again, some of the news is very negative and just this whole COVID thing. The referrals that I'm getting probably 95% of the time are regarding an anxiety disorder or depression.
Mhm.
So,
Yes.
Yeah.
And ironically, a lot of our adults who are chronically mentally ill with schizophrenia and things like that, some are doing really well, believe it or not. We have structured living situations for those individuals. Now, a lot of their daytime programmings were put on hold due to COVID, and that was not the best for them. But as far as struggling with crises, they're making it, which is amazing, just amazing. I would say the only downfall is the programs that are being put on hold due to COVID. But some of them are starting to open back up, so that's good. But the folks that are in our structured living situations are really doing well at this point because they have all the supports that are right there.
Mhm.
Really,
And I
not a lot changes for them. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point that you're making, because I know individuals in the mental health community that aren't doing so well.
Right.
And that's the very reason they're not, because they're not in a structured living
Mhm.
situation, but they had structure to their day because they went to places that
Right.
had programming, and now
Yeah.
those places are closed. So
Mhm.
those individuals first of all, they need to have people around them. And I grew up in the country, so I grew up and I had an older brother, but never bothered with me. So, I grew up kind of like as an only child. So being alone doesn't really bother me. What bothered me the most was I went from being very active and doing all kinds of volunteer things to, okay, now
Oh,
everything stopped.
right.
So then I had to find other things to do. So thankfully, we started doing Zoom things. So that's great.
That
And
helped.
then, yeah, that helped a lot. But Anne's absolutely right. The people that have structure and are in that structured environment would do much better than those who
Right.
thrive on structure, but just aren't living in that structured environment.
And then our case managers haven't stopped. So they would go over to the homes, with their Surface Books and do the telehealth appointments with their consumers, because they don't have Surface Books. They don't have a tablet, a phone, some of them. So our case managers are they didn't stop going into the structured homes with their surfaces and with their phones to connect individuals with their telehealth and their psychiatry and whatever they needed.
Yeah, because during COVID, certainly going into people's homes or people showing up at offices for visits, everything got shut down. So then we had to go to telehealth. And again, that isolates more because maybe the one time a week you were getting out was maybe to see your therapist. And now you can't even do that. But certainly, as Ann said, our case managers are still trying to get individuals connected to their therapists. So, and now we're starting to see more and more of them going back to like a normal schedule, a normal routine, and starting to have, office visits, home visits again. So that's promising.
And,
But
and to piggyback on what Wanda had said, connect. We learned this in our education. Connectedness is so important.
Yes.
So as much as we could keep individuals feeling connected, we have done. Yeah.
So I'm curious, you said that you're seeing a lot more anxiety and depression. Is that just situational, do you think? Or is that, I know when my daughter was diagnosed with depression, her biggest fear was that this was going to last forever, you know, and she's getting treatment and she's doing great. But I don't know if there's two different kinds of, I'm sure there's multiple kinds of depression
Yeah,
and anxiety.
there are depression, like different diagnoses under the realm of depression. So I think it just depends. If you already had like a major depressive disorder, this probably is just compounding that diagnosis because you've had it previously and now there's even more to be depressed about. But we've been seeing kids, at least, for my unit, since I specialize with the children, we've been seeing kids that have never had mental health issues in the past that are now struggling because, the expectations of doing virtual school for 6 or 8 hours a day, plus an additional couple of hours of homework every day, not being able to participate in sports and extracurricular activities, again, just the negative doom and gloom that's on the TV or the radio. And so now we're seeing some more of that kind of stuff popping up. And hopefully it is just a seasonal thing. And once things start to open up, then they'll start to feel better. But the same applies for anxiety disorders. For those that have already been diagnosed, then this potentially is just compounding that. But for others that may have never been worrying about things or anxious about anything, certainly they're starting to. And I will say schooling this year has been difficult for teachers and students in all of the districts. So it was changing and it is changing. It's fluid. Every day is going to be different. And that scares a lot of kids who really like to have consistency. And, what is school going to look like tomorrow or next week? And what about sporting events? What about graduation? Our kids have lost some different normal or typical activities that you would expect to happen during school. So, yeah. And there is, there's a COVID fatigue. So that's bringing people down. Now, I think I heard, and maybe Anne, you've heard about this, there's like Zoom fatigue.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Because we're on our computers 8 hours a day. Yes, we're seeing people, but we're still sitting in front of our computers. And yeah, so
we have a lot of staff, Dell can agree with me on this, that are feeling it. A lot of staff that feel anxious and but every day, we have to show up and give it our best. But we have a lot of staff who are going through the same things.
Right. But I think that helps us to be empathetic because we're struggling with it just as everybody else. If we were to see a psychiatrist right now, we would all have a diagnosis of some sort. And
absolutely. And it would probably be depression and anxiety.
Yeah. But that helps us to be empathetic because we get it. This is what the hand that we've been dealt now. And hopefully there's light at the end of this tunnel. So, yeah.
Like I said before, I hear from a lot of patrons who are struggling right now and are very thankful that the library is open and that we are doing Zoom things. So we really appreciate you guys coming on. I had a general question about the stigma of mental illness. Until my daughter was diagnosed, I didn't even know that there were other people in my family with depression diagnoses because I don't think we talked about it. So I'm wondering if you have seen a change.
I definitely feel like there's a change. I think more and more people are putting themselves out there as saying, I have this diagnosis and this is who I am. So I think in some regards, more and more people are sharing and they're finding others to commiserate with. There are in some of the schools, there are actually groups that meet, and they're run by students because, they are putting themselves out there. I still think society as a whole has a lot of work to do. I think there is still a stigma, and Wanda was kind of mentioning that when we think of mental health, we see a picture that maybe we saw in a movie or in a magazine, and that's not what mental health is. Mental health is everybody. Any one of us can be diagnosed with a mental health disorder right now, an adjustment disorder, because we're all adjusting to different things every day. Anxiety, depression. I mean, yeah. So I think, interestingly, I feel like younger generations seem to be more open. I have anxiety. I have 2 kids, and both of them are like, oh yeah, this friend has this, and this friend is this, and this one takes this meds.
Yeah.
They just share it now, which is a good thing. But in general, there's still a stigma.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say too, the media has been showing some things. I mean, you hear more and more about mental health diagnoses now than you ever did before, which is also good, in a way. Yeah. I mean, there are times I see things where help is offered and it's talked about in a positive way. So more so than I've ever seen.
Yeah, and I think from my experience, the stigma is also within the mental health community itself. Because I will hear individuals like, I say I have PTSD. People feel sorry for me. People are compassionate. Someone says I've been diagnosed with bipolar or borderline personality disorder or schizophrenia. And it's like, oh, stay away from that person. I've seen that too, unfortunately. And there's also, even within the communities, like the LGBT plus community, they have a very high rate of suicide among the young people. The Black community struggles with that. And it's just not talked about in some of these communities. So I think, I agree with Dell. I mean, I think there's some movement forward, but not enough.
Right.
And
Oh, no, not enough.
The only way that this is going to ever break is people need to, again, it's okay not to be okay, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. And when we get to that point, like Dell said, we get to that point as the older generations are able to say, yeah, I'm diagnosed with PTSD, or I'm diagnosed with anxiety, or I'm diagnosed with depression. That's where it's going to really come full circle. And then continuing discussions like this. And again, Sally, thank you so much, because this is what we need. And we need to show that unified front between community members and providers, because the providers, and I'm going to put both of you ladies on the spot because they suffer too. They have days where they're like, Anne has to go take a walk because it's like something horrible happened. And I've seen Dell break down and cry in our training sessions because it's just the confines of the system, and they can't just do whatever they want. They have to work within the system, and the system can be restrictive. And that's hard. And that's hard as a provider to explain to a client sitting across from you. It's like, please help me. And the hands are tied. So I think, we need to have that understanding between the community and the providers too.
That's true. Very true.
And, it's interesting because really York and Adams County have a lot of services in place. Oftentimes we think we don't have anything, but we really do. We have a large number of providers. It's just, I think I can't talk enough about having case management, because without case management, you may not know of the various providers to even reach out to. So, York is rich in services. You just need help sometimes navigating and getting into the right place. So I always want to be hopeful and positive with anybody that I'm working with. I mean, we're going to do it. Just be patient. And then, as Wanda said, yes, as mental health workers, some days we feel just as bad as our clients do. And, you know, I'm known as a sympathy crier. If somebody's crying, I'm right
Oh
there
my
with
God.
you
Yeah.
because I can
Yeah.
feel it. I feel that pain and that suffering. So, yeah, we are human, and you know,
Yeah, and we do our best, you know, sometimes, but sometimes you finish up and you think, my gosh, it wasn't enough. My best was not enough.
right.
You know, and that makes you feel, it makes you feel really upset and sad, but you know, you go back at it and you just keep trying. And that's when we all get together, Dell and I all get together with some of the others, and we'll go back and forth and say, well, did you try this? Or what about this? And somebody will come up with something 9 times out of 10 that you didn't even think of, you know. So but it's true, case management is the key. And I will tell you, I can't even, and Dell probably can agree with me on this one. I've had so many people that have said to me they moved to our state and our area because of the services.
Yes, I've
We
heard
get
that.
a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, that other states have not had quite as many services and the supports. So
Mhm.
it's hard for us when we're in it and we're
Yeah, I
angry
go,
because
what?
we can't
What?
get in
Yeah.
for 2 or 3 months, but to hear from other people from other states that have said, "Oh no, we didn't even have this."
Right. I hear that a lot. I think you moved here for the services. I can't get somebody in to see a psychiatrist for a month. And then they'll say what Dal said. We don't even have this program in our state. So we don't realize it, but yeah, we have a more than most.
And I think anyone, you know, wondering about services can just call and speak to
Yeah.
somebody in our office. I mean, we don't have to open a case and really be helping every step of the way. If you want to know what's available, I mean, certainly just call our office and ask to speak with someone in the adult system or the children's system. And we're always happy to do that. You
Do you
know,
want to give us that number again?
sure. The office home number
Mhm.
is area code 717-771-9618.
And what's interesting is I've had a lot of parents and a lot of individuals after we're done connecting them and helping them say to me, how much do I owe you? And I say, nothing. This is, you know, this is you're the taxpayer. This is for you. And a lot of people can't believe that. And Dell, I'm thinking back to last year when we did that one big meeting with that family, and the grandparents were older, from an older generation. And when we were done speaking, he turned to us and said, well, I got to tell you, you just, well, I forget the exact word he used, but he said, you just helped me think a little bit better of my county government and my taxpayer dollars. And, you know, I'm looking at you guys in a different light. There's so much that people don't know.
Yeah. And honestly, we're used to getting a bad rap sometimes. You know, people
Yeah.
need someone to blame, or maybe they didn't connect with a worker. That's okay. I mean, we're used to it. We have thick skin, but let somebody else assist you.
Yes.
Well, if nobody else has any questions, I just want to thank you all for joining us and telling us, starting this very important conversation, and add that we are going to be having more conversations. And in April, hopefully, Anne, you'll come back and we're going to have some representatives from the state agencies as well.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
And
will be
Sally, again,
wonderful.
this is amazing. I want more and more
Mhm.
people in the community to start asking questions and maybe do similar things, because, you know, we want to get the word out that there is help and there is support. You don't have to do this alone.
Mhm.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, Wanda, for
You're welcome.
connecting us all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Wanda. It was good to see you.
It was
And
good
thank
to
you
see
to those
you.
that are watching.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.